Chapter 13. Alice was standing by the window, staring out over the bleak snowscape that surrounded Macindaw. Through the overcast, she could make out a diffused, watery glow low in the eastern sky that told her the sun had risen. At any other time, she thought wryly, she might well have been entranced by the wild beauty of the scene. The white fields flanked by the dark mass of trees, their own tops crowned with snow. But in her current situation, she found the view bleak and depressing. She longed for some spot of colour in the world outside. The grey walls of the castle were grim and forbidding, and even the standard that Keren had chosen for himself added to the lack of colour. A black sword imposed on a shield background of alternating white and black diagonal strips. The window was a tall one, with the lower sill coming up barely past knee height. This afforded her an excellent view of the courtyard below, although there was usually little of interest to see there. Just the regular changing of sentries and the occasional figure passing from the keep tower to the gatehouse or stables. There were few visitors to Macindaw at this time of year, probably why Keren had chosen winter as the time to stage his coup. The key rattled in the door to the outer room, and she turned in curiously. It was probably one of the servants come to clear away the remains of her breakfast. But any break in the monotony was welcome. She was surprised, then a little alarmed, as the door opened to admit Keren. Her first assumption was that something had happened to arouse his suspicions once more, and she slipped her hands behind her back, feeling for the small, shiny black stone concealed in the cuff of her sleeve. Her surprise grew as she realized that the renegade was carrying a tray, bearing a coffee pot and 2 mugs. He smiled at her as he closed the door with his foot, then moved to set the tray down on the table. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. She said nothing, nodding warily at him, wondering what this was all about. Unbidden, her eyes dropped to the wallet on his belt, where she knew he kept the blue gemstone. He saw the movement and spread his hands out in a reassuring gesture. "No tricks, no mesmerism. I just thought we could have a mug of coffee together," he said. Alice eyed the coffee pot suspiciously. Perhaps Keren had placed some kind of drug in it, a drug that couldn't be countered by the stellatite pebble. "I've just had breakfast," she said coldly. Keren smiled at her, understanding her doubts. "You think the coffee might be drugged," he said. He poured a cup and took a deep sip, sighing with pleasure as he tasted it. "Well, if it is, it's an excellent tasting drug." He paused thoughtfully, as if waiting for something to happen. After several seconds, he shook his head, smiling. No, I don't feel any ill effects at all, other than the desire for another sip." He took another and gestured to the chair opposite him. Alice was still unconvinced. "Of course," she said. "Before you came in, you could have taken an antidote to any drug that might be in the coffee." He nodded, conceding the point. Then he said quite pleasantly, "Alice, if I wanted to drug you, do you think I'd come in here with a jug of coffee to do it?" "I don't see why not," she replied. "Well, think of this. If I did plan to drug you, why would I put you on your guard? Wouldn't it be a lot simpler to slip the drug into the breakfast you've just eaten?" He indicated the empty platter, cup, and teapot on the table, awaiting collection, and Alice realized that he was right. His appearance with the coffee had set her on guard, had aroused her suspicions. But she'd eaten the meal quite happily, with no thought of drugs entering her head. "I suppose so," she said reluctantly. Once again he gestured to the chair, and this time she sat, puzzled as to his motives. He poured a cup for her and gestured for her to drink. She did so warily, sitting on the edge of her chair, alert for anything. The coffee was excellent, as he had promised. And apparently it was nothing but coffee. She felt no sudden dizziness, no compulsion to speak only the truth. But still, she waited for him to have another sip before she drank again. The effect could be cumulative, she reasoned. Once again, he seemed to read her thoughts, and he smiled. "We'll drink sip for sip, if that makes you feel more secure," he said. "You really don't trust me, do you?" He smiled at her, but she remained stone-faced. "You're an oath-breaker," she said. "No one will ever trust you again, not even the Scotti." For a brief moment, she saw the light of pain in his eyes, and she realized that Keren was only too aware of what his actions had cost him. He was an outcast now, enemy to everyone he had known. He would have all of Araluen against him. People whose trust and respect he had won over years of service would now be his sworn enemies. People he had never known would revile his name. And his new comrades would never replace the old, because they would never thoroughly trust him. A man who breaks his oath, who turns traitor once, can always do the same thing again. He knew it because he knew the caliber of men he had recruited to his banner. Men like John Buttle. Keren could never really trust his second-in-command. John Buttle, Sir John as he liked to style himself now, would stand by Keren only so long as it benefited John Buttle. Then, when he saw a better, more profitable alternative, he would betray him. Keren had realized, all too late, that he had become a man like Buttle himself. Untrusted, untrustworthy. He had forsaken so many of the standards and values that he had been brought up to believe in, and he had replaced them with what? That was why he was here now, Alice realized, with sudden clarity. He had nothing in common with his own followers. They were rough, uneducated men without principles or morals. Aside from providing a constant reminder to Keren of what he had become, they would provide him with no company, no stimulation, no amusement. More important, there would be no reassurance for Keren that he had chosen the right path. Amazed at the simplicity of it all, she realized what was behind his visit today. He was alone. Worse still, he was lonely. She looked at him now with a new interest. Perhaps there was a chance here for her to turn this whole debacle around without further loss of life. "It's not too late," she said, leaning forward on her elbows, looking into his eyes. "You can put an end to this." His eyes slid away from hers. He wouldn't meet her gaze. "I can't go back now," he said. "I can only keep going along the path I've chosen." "That's ridiculous," she said, with considerable spirit. "It's never too late to admit you've made a mistake. Are you concerned about Buttle? He wouldn't dare dispute with you. The man's a coward." He laughed harshly. "I'm not worried about Buttle," he told her, "nor any of the brigands and gutter sweepings he's recruited. But you said it yourself. I'm an oath-breaker. Who'll trust me now?" "All right," she admitted. "Your life will never be the same. You've made a mistake, and it's one that could take years to live down. But if you abandon this course now, if you declare your loyalty to Araluen once more, at least you won't be an outcast for the rest of your life." He said nothing, but she could see he was deep in thought. She pressed harder. "Keren, you're expecting some Scotti general." She paused as he looked up at her, suddenly suspicious. She made a dismissive gesture. "Oh, for God's sakes, I'm not stupid," she said impatiently. "One of your men said the name the other day." He relaxed as he remembered the occasion, and she continued. "Look, send him packing. Tell him the deal's off. Or lie to him. Say you'll go ahead with the plan, whatever it is. Just stall him for the time being and get some loyal troops back in the castle. The men you got rid of can't be too far away. Will help you." But Keren was already shaking his head. "It's too late," he said. "There's no turning back now. If I betray the Scotti, they'll kill me. Buttle's men won't fight to save me. He'll take my place. The Scotti won't mind, so long as they know there's no Castle Macindaw threatening their supply lines when they invade." She recoiled. "Invade?" she repeated, incredulously. "I thought they were planning to simply raid across the border." He smiled sadly. "Oh no, my dear girl, this is much more serious than a few skirmishes and raids. They plan to occupy Norgate Fife and make it part of Picta." She felt the blood drain from her face. As a courier, she realized the strategic importance of the fief. If the Scotti were to occupy Norgate, the way would be open for them to raid any of the adjoining fiefdoms, and Araluen could never tolerate that. It would trigger a war that would drag on for years, bleeding both countries dry. "Keren," she said, leaning forward again and taking his hands in hers to impress her sincerity on him. "You have to stop this, now." As he began to shake his head, she raised her voice angrily. "And stop saying it's too late. It's not too late. For God's sakes, I'll speak for you. Stop this now, and I'll speak to the king himself." "A slip of a girl like you?" he said sardonically. Alice bit back the angry retort that sprang to her lips. "You forget. I'm a courier," she said instead. "And a courier's word carries a lot of weight, even with the king. If you give up this madness now, I will do all I can to help you. I swear it." There was a rattle at the door lock, and one of Keren's men threw the door open and entered. Keren looked up at him, his face dark with anger. "Get out, damn you!" he flared. The man made an apologetic gesture, but remained in the doorway. "Sorry, Lord Keren, but Sir John thought you should know. The Scotti general is approaching the castle." Keren stood quickly, the tray rattling as he jostled the table in his haste. He gestured briskly to the man, who left the room, keeping the door open behind him. "Well," said Keren, "it seems the die is cast." Alice tried one more time. "Keren, I can help you. Trust me." He smiled at her again, but she realized the smile was a mask for the pain he was feeling. "You know, up until 2 days ago, that might have been true. But Lord Siron died the night before last." Alice stood up as well. "Siron is dead," she said flatly. Keren nodded. "I didn't mean it to happen that way, but it is my fault. I'm afraid I'm already a murderer, my dear. So unless you can bring a dead man back to life, you really can't help me at all. Trust me," he added, in a parody of her own words. There was nothing for Alice to say. The renegade knight turned away from her, saying bitterly, "Now I suppose I'd better go and meet with this Scotti barbarian."